Well, hello and welcome to Photography with Imre, and this is Macro Photography Part 2. In Part 1, I showed you the many different ways you can actually accomplish macro photography, from using various types of lenses, or putting the lenses on reverse, close-up filters, things like that. In this episode, I wanted to show you a little bit more about technique. Really, macro photography is actually quite simple, and we'll do some close-up stuff here. I won't actually get that close, but nonetheless, another thing I'm going to be doing is I'll be putting this lens here, it's a 50mm f2, onto my video camera, which of course I'm using the EP2, and that way you'll really get a point of view of what it looks like, you know, if you're using just handheld or if you're actually using a monopod and stuff like that. So let's get started as usual. Let's first examine handheld macro photography. Now, there's really nothing wrong with this method, and I do this very often, but as you've probably noticed, shooting subjects up close means you'll have to work with a very small depth of field, often only a few millimeters worth. With my 50mm f2 lens attached, and with the aperture wide open, you can see how it's a little difficult to focus on exactly what you want. Human beings aren't perfectly steady platforms, and combined with other effects such as wind and subjects in motion, there's a little challenge involved with nailing the shot, unless you don't mind where the focus ends up or you're okay with taking several photos just to get that lucky one. On the other hand, using a tripod or a monopod certainly improves the situation. I usually prefer a monopod as it's easier and somewhat faster to move around, but tripods certainly have their place for certain shots too. As you can see, the outcome is much more stable, and even though wind or subjects in motion such as insects may still be factors in nailing that perfect blur-free shot, chances are certainly improved. And before moving on, I'd like to suggest using manual focus. This is especially useful when your subject doesn't want to hold still. I usually pick a distance I feel suits my needs, focus to it, and then fire away. Not only does this make shooting faster, but it may also help avoid those instances where the camera decides to pick an odd place to focus on, thus ruining the shot. Now, if you know a thing or two about aperture, you're likely thinking, why not stop down the lens, way down, to get a larger depth of field? Well, why not? It's a perfectly good way to get more in focus, especially if that's what you're after. This does lead to some other things to keep in mind though. Stopping down means less light is able to get through the lens and onto the sensor, thus slowing down the shutter speed. Depending on how much available light you have, you may not be able to get a blur-free shot. For example, think of a fast-moving bee around a flower. In addition, diffraction may occur when using very small aperture sizes, usually starting around f11 or f13. Diffraction usually leads to a loss of detail in images and gets worse as aperture size decreases. However, this should not stop you from using small apertures, as in most cases the softening is not very noticeable and can be corrected to some extent by sharpening the photo in an image editor. For more on diffraction, check out my blog. Now let's jump back to speeding up that shutter. One method of doing so is to simply increase the sensitivity of your sensor. Of course, there's a trade-off as more noise will appear in the photo, but most modern digital SLRs perform quite well at ISO levels up to 1600, with some better models providing acceptable images at 32 and even 6400 ISO. And similar to diffraction, you can reduce some of that noise when editing your shot. Another way to help freeze the action is to use a flash. In some cases, you might be able to get away with using the pop-up flash on your camera if your lens won't cast a shadow on the subject. As mentioned in part 1 of this series, lenses with shorter focal lengths have smaller working distances, and they are most prone to casting shadows on subjects. For other cases, there are flashes made more specifically for macro photography, such as the ring flash, which is also popularly used for some portraitures, and twin flashes. Although there are quite a few models on the market, the majority simply attach onto the front of the lens using an adapter, and some have a controller that sits on the camera's hot shoe. You can also use a more common electronic flash like the one I have here on an extension cord, which works quite well. Although this method doesn't provide light from all around like a ring flash would, it does offer the freedom of using the flash at almost any angle you want. Personally, I also prefer getting a little bit of shadow on the subject, as that can sometimes help define it better. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode, and as usual, I will be writing a blog post, and I'll include some links to other sites on macro photography, as well as that one on diffraction, which is quite interesting. And on my blog, you'll find links to Twitter and Facebook, so please do follow and like the page. And if you haven't already, please subscribe, and that way you can stay up to date with my videos. And don't forget, you can send in your requests for videos as well, such as this one. This was actually a request by a couple of users. Thanks a lot, and I hope to see you next time. Take care.